The Last Ronin, we see a good example of how comics can operate outside of traditional literary structures. Here, a simple variation on the three-act structure can offer us some important insight not just on this story, but on all the stories we tell. The three-act structure is the foundation of the Western storytelling tradition. It is elegantly simple. 1. Setup. 2. Conflict/confrontation. 3. Resolution. Proportion will be argued, but most scholars would be contented with a ratio of roughly 30-60-10, though nobody told J.R.R. Tolkien this. The concept of the three-act structure traces back to Aristotle, and proliferates from there. Astute high school readers will note that Shakespeare uses 5 acts, but he never actually wrote that way. It was later editor Nicholas Rowe who, in 1709, divided Shakespeare's work into fifths, and many feel it should actually be thirds. We should also note that the three-act structure very much corresponds with Joseph Campbell's theory of the monomyth, another important theory on how the repetitious patterns in our narratives, and one that Campbell argued was completely natural to human storytelling. In a long-standing comics franchise, however, the three-act structure proportions don't work. Typically, the origin story is delivered in near entirety in the first issue, as is the case with the Mirage Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Thus, when ending a long-standing franchise, your portion is going to come in something like 1/99/1. This isn't necessarily a problem, of course, but it does allow us to ponder the impacts of an unusual structure in franchise-ending stories such that we see in iconic comics closers like The Dark Knight Returns, or Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. In these instances, and in The Last Ronin, disproportionate structures in the eyes of the audience can cause issues such as unresolved threads, incomplete character arcs, and fundamental inconsistencies with how the conflict was explored in the second act. The Last Ronin might benefit, however, from being scripted when TMNT was just 11 issues in. This gives the story a stripped-down feel and an engagement with the franchise at a time when it was still quite young. For the reader, of course, that's not exactly the case, and as discussed in a previous video essay, it is genuinely hard not to read this story as a bookend for the entire franchise in all of its many permutations. Pun there on the word mutations. The effect here might be seen as something like Whiplash, a massive time jump that skips over decades of second act continuity and conflict exploration, followed by 5 issues with which to put the entire story of the Ninja Turtles to bed, so to speak. It's abrupt in that sense, but so are most real-world endings, and thus the lingering third act, traditional to Western literature, might actually be the less realistic, where stories like The Last Ronin can instead create a breakneck pace that conveys things like desperation and shock. This naturally leads to some deeply fun questions about how stories should set up and convey the actual concept of final. What a good ending should entail, on what grounds we evaluate an ending as good, and why those values are important to us. The point then, if there is one, is that alternate universe comics franchise finales are not better or worse, just different. But in a literary landscape that is far more entrenched in its structural patterns than most realize, it's compelling to see a different structure peek out of its shell.